Hi everyone. I wanted to go over exporting today. I know that some of you are familiar with exporting and some of you are not. So let's just go over it to double check and make sure. So I'm starting here in Photoshop, and there's a number of ways that we can do this. And some of you are definitely going to need to composite in After Effects if you're adding anything additional that you haven't done in Photoshop, such as maybe you're doing some secondary animation in After Effects and not in Photoshop. But some of you have really set up your Photoshop file to really do everything within Photoshop itself, which I personally think is a little bit tedious for some things, like if we're making an object move from point A to point B, that's a tedious process in Photoshop, which can be done much easier in After Effects. But I want to show you what we can do. So for exporting something out of Photoshop, if this is what I want to export, I'm going to go to File, Export, Render Video. And this is what we need to pay attention to. So we can export this two ways. We can export it as an H.264, and that's going to come out as an MP4, and that will look like this. We can also export it as QuickTime, and I'm sorry, I don't know if this is the same on Windows. I do think that there's a little bit of like file differences. I know on Windows, oftentimes it's an AVI file, I believe, but QuickTime will come out as an MOV. And the thing I want you to notice here is that we can have transparency in a QuickTime file that we cannot, or in an MOV that we can't have within an MP4. So if you come down here, we've changed this to QuickTime. We can come to alpha channel, and instead of saying none, we're going to say straight unmatted. And that is going to maintain all of this transparency here. So I'll hit render. And it comes out, looks like this. And the thing to know is it's not something that we can just like open up. When it opens, it looks like this. So this file is used for if for some reason you want to actually render the video and then bring it into another software where you need that transparency, then you have that. So let's open up After Effects and let me show you what I mean. So I'm creating a new comp, and I'm turning this on, which is our default background is black. We can set that right here. If we do Command K, that will open up these composition settings. We can also come over here to this right here and go to composition settings. And the background color is black. We could change this to any color, blue, whatever. But point being, this is just the transparency color, and we can turn this on and off. It's the same thing either way. This is not like a solid black color. This is transparency right now. We turn that on and off with this switch right here. So when I bring in these two files, so blob example MOV, I'm going to drag it down and watch what happens. We keep that transparency in here. When I drag in my blob example MP4, I drag that down. I'm going to put it over top, and you can see, okay, now I have this solid background that probably isn't something that I want. So keep in mind that we don't really necessarily need to render out these videos if we're coming into After Effects, because of course, we've seen so many times that After Effects works with Photoshop. And so because I don't have a background color here in this Photoshop document, I come over here and I can turn this on and off, and I see that this maintains the transparency that's right here. So just a little bit about alpha and transparency, which is something we're going to get to in one of our next lessons. But just a quick review on this. So file, export, render video, and you can render as in H.264. If you are not going to take your project into After Effects, I encourage pretty much everyone to take their project into After Effects and try and add something within After Effects or just in composite within After Effects. But there's a few of you who don't need to. So what you would do is you would just come over here and you would render your video as an H.264. You can see now I don't have access to that alpha channel anymore, and I'll say render, and it will be wherever it is. But you're still going to be turning in your Photoshop file, and you're going to be turning in that MP4. So that's how to render from Photoshop. And make sure whenever you are rendering, make sure that you don't have like a big long trail of black at the end of your MP4 file. And then also, like, yeah, give me a different color than just a black background. Obviously, you're making environments, so there should be some other sort of background than just this black background. So now let's look at how to render from After Effects. So I brought in my blob example into After Effects, and I'm just going to render this little piece. And real quick, again, I want to go over how we could make this into a longer loop. So I have my blob example here, and if I just make a new comp, and it's going to be 10 seconds, let's just make it an even 10, and I'm going to call this blob, B-L-O-B, loop. All right, now got put into this folder. I didn't really want that, but for organizational purposes, it would be nicer if it was not inside of that folder. Here we go, blob loop. And so I can just bring this down and I'll put it into, sorry, I'm going to take my blob example and I'm going to bring it and put it into my blob loop. This is called nesting. And you can see blob example, which was only about a second long. It takes up only about a second on my timeline. I'm going to duplicate, which is Command D. And now I will shift select, right click, keyframe assistant, sequence layers, hit OK. That stretches this out. And now I have a longer sequence. And now I could come here if I wanted, pull this back and work in my trim comp to work area. So that's better. This time, at least whenever I render it, it's not just going to be 1 second long, it's going to be 5 seconds. So that's probably preferable. At least we can see it loop a few times. So when I'm rendering from Adobe After Effects, the best way to do it is to use something called Media Encoder. Media Encoder is part of like something that comes through After Effects. Usually whenever you download After Effects, Media Encoder is downloaded as well. And so you can either just open Media Encoder ahead of time, which is this one right here, ME, or you can come up to here, composition. Sorry, we're back in After Effects. We go to composition, add to Media Encoder queue, and that will probably open Media Encoder automatically. Either way, whenever you come up here and you say add to Media Encoder queue, it has to do something called connected dynamic link, which is how the Adobe programs speak to each other. So it takes a moment. It doesn't happen automatically. And we're just kind of like sitting here and waiting for our composition to pop up here in Media Encoder. Okay, that's fine. Doesn't matter. That didn't have anything to do with what we were working on. Okay, and you can see here that blob loop has now been added to our queue. It took like, I don't know, maybe like that was 30 seconds or so. It takes longer than expected sometimes. I can click on these blue highlighted words right here and I can change some things. So if I click on this one, yours might be set to MOV, or it might already be set to H.264. What we want is H.264. When that pops up, then we get this export settings right here. In order to find H.264, you'll go up here and you will select H.264. Match source high bitrate is fine. And decide where it's going to be saved. Usually, so it saves inside your project folder in another folder called AME, which is Adobe Media Encoder. Usually I like to just like save it on my desktop and then move it to wherever it needs to be immediately so that we keep like nice clean desktops and organized files. But so I'm going to save. And we can, we don't have to worry about all this right now. And I hit that and we wait for our material to render and blob loop. So I have my 5 seconds of my swish. So this is how I really want you to do it. I want you to do it through Media Encoder. There is the alternative way of adding it to the Adobe After Effects queue, just like the After Effects queue. So I believe to do that, you go up to composition, add to render queue, and then you get this render queue right here, and we have to determine some things. So we can click here, render settings. That looks good. We can choose our format. And the annoying thing is that there is no MP4 option here in the render queue. In order to get the MP4, you have to do Media Encoder. And so that's why I'm asking you to do Media Encoder, because I want the MP4s. MP4s are a really manageable file size that they're easy to send to each other and they keep pretty good quality. So if for some reason your Media Encoder just will not work, I know that some people cannot get Media Encoder to work sometimes, then you gotta let me know, and you can render as a QuickTime from here in the render queue. But that's only if it doesn't work. So if Media Encoder doesn't work, then please do that. But there is also, you can see here again in the render queue, there is the option to do alpha. If you need to render out a video that still retains its alpha, then you could come here for that. And output 2, of course, that's just where we're saving it. So that's how we render. So you're going to turn in your Photoshop file or animate file. You're going to turn in an After Effects file if you're compositing through After Effects, and you're going to turn in the MP4 file. So 3 things. And last thing I want to show you, just which doesn't have anything to do with rendering, but like say that we have a object and we want our character to travel behind the object. So what I can do is I'm going to just make a circle, and we're going to imagine that it is our blob is moving around the circle. So all right, great start. But if I move it under, well, it doesn't move around the circle. If I move it above, of course, it's just behind the circle now. So what can I do to make that work? Because right in the middle of our section is where we need to split it. So this is a really useful tip. I'm not sure how to do this without the hotkeys. So gotta get the hotkeys down. So I'm gonna select my layer that I want to have part of it in front and part of it underneath. And what I can do here is I can say Shift Command D on Mac. And it's the same thing in Windows. It's just whatever, I can't remember, I think it's maybe Alt is replaces the command, if that's it. So whatever you usually use, when I say command and you use another button, that's the button you're going to use. So you can see what happened is I have my blob example split. So I'll Command Z real fast. So wherever I have my playhead, Shift Command D, that sort of like cuts that clip in half. And now I could drag this section above, or sorry, I want this section because this is the front section, that section above and that section behind. So and of course, see, I'm going to have to do that for all of them. So let's do that again. It's just Command D. Let's drag this section up. Shift Command D. Shift Command D. Whoops, wrong section. And last one. And now I have my object orbiting my circle. It looks like it's actually going behind. It's providing a little bit of depth. Let's and I'm going to select all of these, and I want to move them down just a little so I can hit T, and I can open up the position on all of them, and then I can move them down, and all of them are moving down. We can still see that they're highlighted, so it's sort of like staying in that realm. I like that more than its position before. Oh, it looks like I didn't think about this section right here. So I could Command Z and redo a bunch of that, or I could like come back here and like split these up too. That's kind of annoying. So next time I would make sure that I double checked everything before I did that. You can see, of course, how easy it will be to get a messy timeline if we don't keep things organized. I like to try and keep things in a very like either ascending or descending order. Stop that one. So it looks like our last one doesn't quite reach the end. We could adjust this by coming here, I think. And there we go. So I hope that helps explain how you could, some of you have objects that move. I said like, have this go behind one of the like scenery objects in your scene. And so that's a way that you can do that. You can do Shift Command D and have it travel behind. I hope that that's helpful. Good tip, and looking forward to seeing your work. So.